mounted on a spirited pony with a lasso at his saddlebow, he is no mean adversary for a single man to encounter. He rides well and fearlessly, and throws the lasso with unerring aim. It is a beautiful sight to see him with his old blanket streaming in the wind, his head bent eagerly forward, and lasso whirling in circles high in the air, chasing down some refractory animal that he seldom fails to catch at the first throw. Captain George W. Hughes, U.S. Army, San Antonio de Bexar in Texas, circa 1846.
The Ruger New Model Vaquero follows the traditional Western-style single-action revolver. Before I get deep into the detail, I need to clear up a matter regarding terminology. Some folks refer to the early model Vaquero as the old model. Old model Vaquero perhaps isn't the proper term, as old model refers to 3-screw pre-transfer bar Ruger single action. Everybody knows what you mean when you say old model Vaquero, but really there is only Vaquero and New Vaquero. The difference is that the original Vaqueros were built on a larger frame, identical to the Blackhawk frames. They had XR3-RED grip frames, and some had bird's heads, and can handle most any ammunition that you feed them. New Vaqueros are built on a smaller frame, more similar to the original Colt SAA. They have beveled cylinders and XR3 grip frames, which are slightly smaller than the XR3-REDs. Most people will tell you not to shoot super heavy loads out of the new Vaqueros, especially the 45s, because of the smaller frame size. The new Vaquero also has a reverse index pawl, which stops cylinder rotation so that the desired loading and unloading port aligns perfectly with the chamber. In the case of non-Bisley models, the new Vaquero's hammer also is higher and more swept back versus the original large-frame Blackhawk's hammer. Later new Vaqueros also don't have the full case-colored cylinder frame, replaced by an all-blued one. Cylinder diameter and length are greater on the original Vaquero, commensurate with the larger frame and to accommodate longer cartridges, such as the 44 Magnum and 45 Colt. The larger diameter also mean that there's more beef between the chambers. More important with the 45 application, as in hot loads. Now, let me get on with showcasing this excellent example of a new Vaquero. What you are looking at here is a highly polished stainless steel version of the 45 Colt chambered new Vaquero that has more original Colt Single Action Army styling. A high blade and permanent front sight gives the eyes something to focus on when aiming, albeit they are hard to see against the notch rear sight. Somebody, at some time, took to filing on that front sight, which would raise the point of aim. Single-action revolvers are notorious for shooting high, so I am not going to know what filing the front sight will gain me, if anything at all, until I take it to the range. Some polishing of the file marks would have finished the front sight out nicely. Below the front sight is a well-blended 5.5-inch gold hammer forged barrel with ultra-precise rifling. Just below the barrel is a crescent-shaped ejector rod head that provides enough real estate to operate the lengthy ejector rod, which is capable enough to shed the chambers of those lengthy .45 Colt cases. Note that there are no markings on either side of the barrel, but you will find a safety notice on the bottom of the barrel alongside the ejector rod and spring housing. I like that Ruger opted to place the safety warning in a non-conspicuous place, although none should be necessary at all. The barrel and ejector housing are beautifully integrated into the also highly polished stainless steel frame. All lines of this new Vaquero are nicely smooth and rounded out to not only give the new Vaquero a sleek look, but contribute to handling of the revolver due to the lack of sharp edges. Just in front of the cylinder on the left side of the frame, in its usual place, is a spring-loaded base pin release. The cylinder holds 6 rounds of .45 Colt ammunition, as we call it today. There was, however, a time when it was referred to as Long Colt, to distinguish between it and the .45 Smith & Wesson cartridge. That was referred to as the Short Colt cartridge, which was used in Smith & Wesson breaktop revolvers. The cylinder to forcing cone gap is important to revolvers. It must be of a distance that will not bind the cylinder after the face of the cylinder is coated with firing residue, but tight enough to restrict as much side flash as possible. The measured cylinder to forcing cone, or more commonly referred to as the flash gap, is 5/1000 of an inch and is well within the acceptable limits of 4/1000 to 8/1000 of an inch. It must be stated, for the uninitiated to revolvers, that all flesh should be well away from the flash gap as possible to avoid injury from escaping hot gases that are forced outward when firing the revolver. Those appendages, that we call fingers, will thank you. As the hammer is pulled, the cylinder rotates to the right, which is common to all single-action revolvers. Something that Colt realized not only when developing the 1873 single-action revolver, but from Remington revolvers, was the advantage to having a top strap that added rigidity to the frame, but also prevented a revolver from being shot out by the frame stretching to a point where the firearm was dangerous for the operator to shoot. I was in my favorite FFL shop recently, where I had the opportunity to handle an original Colt 1860 open-top cap and ball revolver that was for sale. To say that it had been shot out would be an understatement. It would have cost more than the asking price to correct the frame stretch of the revolver. Needless to say, I passed on purchasing it. In a way, the top strap of the new Vaquero is beautifully part of the frame and provides a nice place to have a notch to use as a rear sight. Loading and unloading a single-action revolver is a slow process compared to quick magazine changes of a pistol. Colt single-action revolvers, and many clones of, require pulling the hammer to the half-cock position to both load and unload. Ruger single-action revolvers are different. A simple outward push or pull of the loading gate without putting the hammer in the half-cock position is all that is needed for the cylinder to rotate and assist in the loading and unloading process. With the loading gate open, the cylinder can only be rotated to the right, but unlike Colt and clone single-action revolvers, the new Vaquero has a reverse index pawl that stops cylinder rotation so that the desired ejection and loading point aligns perfectly with the chamber, thus making case ejection easier. This was an improvement over the original Vaquero and also Ruger Blackhawk revolvers, where one had to be careful with rotating the cylinder to avoid over travel that would make the chamber alignment, well, out of alignment, enough so that expended shell casings could not be ejected by the ejector rod, as the shell casing would butt against the frame. The advancement of the Ruger loading gate makes loading and unloading a safer proposition to make, as the hammer is prevented from moving all the way rearward into the cock position, which leaves the hammer resting against a transfer bar safety block during both processes. The hammer is a high and nicely curved affair with a valley deep enough and a nicely serrated hammer spur to accommodate cocking and decocking of the revolver. I'll touch on that in a bit. Cocking and decocking of the hammer is performed easily with the thumb of the shooting or support hand thumb. There is also no Colt clicks, as found on Colt revolvers, and clones thereof. There is only the rest or full cock position. Being of the single action nature, when the hammer is fully cocked, operations are transferred to the trigger. The trigger resides in the trigger guard that, while small, can accommodate a gloved hand. As the hammer is moved to the rear, so is the round, curved, and highly polished stainless steel trigger, whereupon a very light 2 pounds, 2.4 ounces of trigger finger pull to the rear will drop the hammer. There is no hint of slack when pulling the trigger, just a consistently feeling wall until a very clean break is felt and the hammer falls, after which there is only an almost imperceptible over-travel felt. This trigger is much better than the trigger on the Ruger Blackhawk that I recently reviewed. Ruger Single Action revolvers use a coil hammer spring in lieu of a flat spring, as found in Colt and cloned Colt Single Action revolvers. This makes for a more powerful hammer strike on the primer, and therefore more reliable ignition. Shooting a firearm, any firearm, is made easier when you have something to hold on to. It just so happens that the new Vaquero has something to hold on to, a grip frame, whereupon grip panels are mounted. Also, as highly polished as the rest of the revolver, the grip frame is typical of single-action revolvers and should be friendly to even the smallest of hands. For my hand, the grip length is perfect, as long as I take a high hold on the handle. With a low hold, I can wrap my little finger under the butt, but I prefer a high hold with a single-action revolver that places the hammer spur as close to the firing hand thumb as possible, which will also not interfere with the support hand thumb if it's used for cocking. The wood Ruger grip panels, at some point, were replaced with a beautiful set of Ruger New Vaquero Classic panel with Lone Star medallions in super walnut from the Altamont Company. These grip panels look great and feel great on the new Vaquero and are perfectly fitted. The second to last thing I want to mention are the frame markings. Ruger did a nice job in keeping markings to a minimum on this revolver. The only right side frame marking is the unit serial number, while the left side frame marking is only the model, Ruger New Vaquero, and the caliber. Nice job, Ruger. One last thing before I move into maintenance of the new Vaquero, and I don't want to over-egg this, is the look and feel of the revolver. While a bit on the heavy side due to the all-stainless steel construction, the new Vaquero feels well balanced in the hand and not barrel heavy, as one might expect. This is an absolutely gorgeous looking firearm, One should feel pride and ownership of this fine example of a single-action revolver. Now, let's move into maintaining the Ruger New Vaquero. Care of the Ruger New Vaquero is quite simple, but because of its all stainless steel construction, there is a caveat that I'll reveal later. First, though, is a safety check to ensure that the firearm is safe to work on. With the revolver pointed in a safe direction, open the loading gate. This lowers the cylinder latch into the frame, and rotate the cylinder. Examine every chamber in the cylinder to be certain that the revolver is unloaded. Leave the loading gate open. I am not going to take you through the disassembly and reassembly processes, but I will refer you to the online videos demonstrating the disassembly and reassembly of Ruger single-action revolvers. That can be viewed by going to ruger.com/techtips. Periodic inspection of any firearm is important to ensuring its safe operation. It is important to clean and inspect your firearm after each range session, or whenever the firearm has been exposed to sand, dust, moisture, humidity, or other adverse conditions. Proper maintenance increases the longevity of your firearm and will allow early detection of worn or broken parts. Prior to each use, visually inspect the firearm to ensure no components are damaged, missing, loose, bent, cracked, chipped, or peened. If you observe excessive wear, you should stop using your revolver and contact customer service or a trained, certified gunsmith to evaluate its condition and replace any worn parts if necessary. After reassembly, and as part of the regular periodic inspection of your revolver, perform the following function checks to ensure that the revolver is functioning properly. For the Ruger New Vaquero, here's how to do that. Note that I use snap caps, although none is needed to dry fire the revolver. Snap caps just give me peace of mind that the firing pin has something soft to impact. With the revolver pointed in a safe direction, open the loading gate and rotate the cylinder while loading a snap cap into each chamber. The cylinder should spin clockwise freely, with distinct clicks when the chambers are indexed by the pawl. Cylinder movement should be smooth without binding. With the loading gate open, attempt to cock the hammer. You should not be able to cock the hammer. Close the loading gate and cock the hammer. The hammer should rotate fully to the rear, and the cylinder should rotate 1/6 of a revolution, without you feeling any unusual drag or require more force than normal. With the hammer cocked, attempt to open the loading gate. It should not open. Dry fire the firearm enough so that the cylinder rotates through several revolutions. The hammer should fall completely with each pull of the trigger. If you feel some drag, or if it is impossible to cock the hammer when you should be able to do so, or the newly assembled firearm fails any of these checks, first ensure that the base pin is fully seated into the cylinder frame. It may be necessary to remove the base pin, reposition the cylinder slightly, and then reinsert the base pin in order to fully seat the base pin. If any of the function checks fail, or if you are uncertain, please consult a competent gunsmith or contact Ruger Customer Service at 336-949-5200 for further firearm inspection before using the firearm. With that, I'm going to talk about taking care of stainless steel firearms. like this example of the new Vaquero. Note that I am not telling you anything that Ruger doesn't already provide. Firearms made of stainless steel are relatively more resistant to corrosion than blued steel firearms. However, you should still inspect it frequently and clean, lubricate, and apply an appropriate rust preventive as required. Sometimes, surface discoloration may be noted, particularly in the grip area of stainless steel handguns, resulting from perspiration. Contact with some types of holsters can also cause stains or rusting. Rusting may also occur as a result of the handgun being exposed to moisture, humidity, salt air, or chemicals. Minor discoloration can usually be removed by rubbing the stained area with an abrasive ink eraser, crocus cloth, or a metal polishing compound. When using any of these abrasives, proceed with care and use light pressure to achieve a blending of color with those areas that are not discolored. Exposed surfaces on the firearm should be cleaned and wiped dry after use or after exposure to adverse conditions. If the firearm is to be stored, coat it with a light film of oil or preservative. Where the firearm is in continuing use and the presence of oil or grease would be objectionable, then the external surfaces can be coated after cleaning and drying with a paste wax formulated for use on metals. Apply the wax sparingly, allow time for it to dry hard, then buff lightly with a soft cloth. When applying the wax, take care that it does not get into the mechanism or on the functioning parts, such as the cylinder latch, trigger, or cylinder locking notches. A properly applied hard wax coating will not interfere with firearm handling, and it will provide a measure of protection against the formation of rust. Well, with the maintenance past us, let's get to the range. The reason that you are really here, to watch how it performs. Before I get into today's range session, I want to touch on if the revolver is cocked and you wish to let the hammer down to its rest fully forward position against the frame. This applies too if the revolver is hot, loaded with live rounds, or not. There are two methods in which to decock the single action revolver. Regardless of the method, use extreme care when attempting to decock the revolver, as the thumb slipping during this process can result in an accidental discharge if the trigger is held to the rear and a live cartridge is chambered. The first method is provided in the Ruger manual. Make certain that the revolver is pointing in a safe direction. Make certain both hands are dry and not impeded in any way by gloves, bandages, cold, etc. Grasp the revolver, if right-handed, so that the thumb and forefinger of your left hand are firmly holding the cylinder frame below the middle of the cylinder. Your left hand, if right-handed, should support the full weight of the revolver, allowing you to use your right hand to manipulate the hammer and trigger. Place your right thumb firmly on the hammer spur and, with your thumb securely in control of the hammer, squeeze the trigger only enough to permit the hammer to break free of the trigger. At that instant, immediately release the trigger and then slowly permit the hammer, still secure under your thumb, to move forward to its resting position against the frame. Note that it is imperative that finger pressure be removed from the trigger just as soon as it is free of the hammer. Then, properly, the trigger and hammer will move toward their fully forward rest positions together. Decocking method 2 is essentially the same, but you will be decocking the revolver with the thumb of the support hand. As with method 1, ensure that the revolver is pointing in a safe direction and make certain both hands are dry and not impeded in any way by gloves, bandages, cold, etc. Hold the revolver, if right-handed, so that the thumb and forefinger of your left hand are firmly holding the cylinder frame below the middle of the cylinder and away from the flash cap area. Your left hand, if right-handed, should support the full weight of the revolver. Place your support hand thumb firmly on the hammer spur and, with your thumb securely in control of the hammer, squeeze the trigger with the right hand trigger finger only enough to permit the hammer to break free of the trigger. At that instant, immediately release the trigger and then slowly permit the hammer, still secure under your thumb, to move fully forward to its resting position against the frame. Again, it is imperative that finger pressure be removed from the trigger just as soon as it is free of the hammer. Then, properly, the trigger and hammer will move toward their fully forward rest positions together. So, you might be questioning what happens if the trigger is held fully to the rear while performing the decocking procedure. Let me explain that. When the trigger is released after the hammer is released, the transfer bar safety will prevent the hammer from striking the firing pin, thus preventing the firing pin from transferring that energy to the primer of a loaded live cartridge. If the trigger is held to the rear while the decocking procedure is taking place, the revolver operates as it would if you pulled the trigger during actual firing. Transfer bar safety will take the impact of the hammer and then transfer that energy forward to the firing pin that will, as designed, contact the primer of a loaded cartridge. Practice decocking the firearm using both methods with an unloaded revolver until you have developed the proper control and touch to decock your revolver safely. The key to safe decocking is having the weight of the revolver controlled with one hand, while the thumb of either hand and forefinger of the shooting hand control the hammer and trigger. If you are left-handed, use the right hand to support the firearm and away from the flash gap. Now, let's get to some shooting and see how well the new Vaquero and I work together. I will make notes, as appropriate, during the range session. If you remember from the features segment, the front sight had been filed down. Since I did not know how this was going to affect POA versus POI, I decided to shoot with a two-handed grip to get my aim as steady as possible. Taking a sight picture, at the bottom of the bullseye, I found that this was a perfect 6 o'clock hold at 7 yards. That, incidentally, surprised me, as I thought the impact would be higher. So what you are seeing are 24 rounds being fired and my pushing the sight on 2 of those rounds that resulted in a low right target impact. The front sight is hard to pick out against the stainless steel rear sight, but everything, including headshots, came out pretty well, considering. Surprisingly to me, the range day was cut short, and I'm going to tell you why. The fault lies in the ammunition, and not the new Vaquero. Let me explain. I had 25 rounds of my son-in-law's handloads, 250 grain bullets over 5 grains of Ogden tight group smokeless gunpowder, for an approximate muzzle velocity of 697 feet per second. I also had 25 rounds of factory Fiocchi 250 grain ammunition with a rated muzzle velocity of 750 feet per second. With the exception of one of my son-in-law's handloads that had a high primer that would not allow the cylinder to turn, the remaining 24 fired without incident. Once I had expended the handloads, I turned to the Fiocchi loads. That is where things took a different turn, or lack of. When I loaded the first round and rotated the cylinder bound up. I could see where the rim of the cartridge was binding against the recoil shield and the loading gate base. That's odd, I thought. I removed the cartridge, thinking it to be an oddball, and attempted to load a second round. Same thing happened. The cylinder bound up, and again, I could see where the rim of the cartridge was binding against the recoil shield and the loading gate base. It turned out that none of the Fiocchi ammunition would allow the cylinder to rotate without binding so tightly that, at one point, I had to remove the cylinder to remove the offending cartridge. Note that the Fiocchi loads had been shot successfully in the Ruger Blackhawk that I reviewed previously, and in all my Uberti reproductions. I have no explanation as to why the Fiocchi loads would not chamber fully in the new Vaquero and cause the cylinder to bind. When arriving home, I took a feeler gauge to measure the distance between the rear of several chambers to the front of the rim. This distance measured 0.08 of an inch, whereas there was no gap between the face of the cylinder to the front of the rim on the hand-loaded rounds. In other words, the rim of the hand-loaded cartridges were flush against the cylinder, and no binding occurred, as it should be. The Fiocchi ammunition, on the other hand, was not as it should be. With all that said, this range session closed out prematurely. With that said, let me at least provide a session synopsis with the good. As far as accuracy, the Ruger New Vaquero is very accurate, and if I did my part, holes in the target appeared where I wanted them, or at least close enough to warrant my satisfaction. The front sight had been filed down, but that did not impact my accuracy with the firearm, just where I needed to hold. The New Vaquero is well balanced in the hand, and although heavy, ease in handling this firearm is very pleasing. A very light 2-pound 2.4 ounces of trigger finger pull to the rear drops the hammer. As usual, it is best to keep the trigger finger away from the trigger until you are ready to shoot. The front sight is thin and blends too well with the rear sight channel. I found it best to bury the front sight until I could not see it, then raise it enough so that it just peeked above the rear sight channel. The New Vaquero, like the original Colt Single Action Army, is better as a fast-action, instinctive point-and-shoot firearm. While a shooting session at the indoor range proved to be very informative, more information can be gathered by shooting some steel targets, and that means it's time to move to the outdoor range. Nestled within the Charlie Elliott Wildlife Center, just a few miles south of Mansfield, Georgia, is the Clybell shooting range, where steel targets abound for handgun shooters. The new Vaquero, while quite capable of shooting a variety of targets, nothing is more satisfying than hearing the ring of steel when struck by a projectile like a .45 caliber bullet, and seeing some swinging targets, well, swing when struck. I feel right at home here, and I am hoping that the Ruger New Vaquero will as well. So let's see. With steel targets at distances from 15 yards to 35 yards, it won't be much of a challenge to the new Vaquero, but my aiming it where I need it to be aimed might pose a challenge. If you remember, the front sight had been filed down somewhat. At the indoor range, I had to hold the sight picture to just where that front sight barely peeked above the rear sight channel. Let's see how well that works out here. If there was to be a cloned Colt Single Action Army revolver outfitted with modern safety features, the Ruger New Vaquero would be vying for top spot, in my humble opinion. Easy on the eyes, the ease of handling with its balance and feel, and a very good trigger, the New Vaquero makes for an excellent and relaxing day at the range. I do like the feel and handling of a Bisley, and the New Vaquero Bisley might be a choice for me. For those SASS, Single Action Shooting Society folks, there's also a pair of new Vaquero SASS models that will stretch the pocketbook and deplete the savings account quite a bit. Although not specifically stated by Ruger in the instruction manual, it has been noted that light loads should be fired through the new Model Vaquero, such as cowboy or light-loaded hand loads, and leave the heavy loads to the larger Ruger Vaquero and Blackhawk revolvers. There are hotter than normal 45 Colt loads that were designed for the Ruger Vaquero and Blackhawk, as they have large cylinders with thick walls. The new Vaqueros have smaller cylinders and thinner walls. They are not designed for the hot rod loads. That is the same reason that new Vaqueros are not made in the 44 Magnum caliber, like the older models. You are asking for trouble putting that much pressure inside a thinner vessel. With that said, Ruger has repeatedly stated that the new Vaquero is safe for SAMI Max 5 Colt loads, 14,000 psi. Anything more than that, and you are entering uncharted territory. In other words, do the required research on your desired ammunition to ensure that it is safe to fire through the new Vaquero. Place safety, as always, first. With closing this out, during this presentation I have divulged a lot of information regarding the Ruger New Vaquero. So what do you think? Is the Ruger New Vaquero a firearm that catches your interest, or would a first generation, if you will, Ruger Vaquero or Blackhawk single action revolver that can handle higher pressure ammunition be more to your liking? Well, it's time, and probably past the time, to close out this chapter of the Range Ronin Chronicles. I hope to see you again, and until that time, stay vigilant, stay armed, and stay safe out there.